In 1837, the coastal village of Skagen in northern Jutland witnessed events that would forever change how the local fishing community viewed the sea. What began as whispered tales among fishermen's wives would eventually inspire one of literature's most beloved fairy tales, though the truth behind those whispers remained buried for over a century. The Andersen family had lived in Skagen for 3 generations. Jacob Andersen, a weathered fisherman of 42 years, worked the treacherous waters off the northern tip of Denmark with his 2 sons. His wife, Maren, tended to their modest cottage overlooking the grey expanse of the North Sea. Their daughter, Kirsten, had recently turned 18 and possessed an unusual fascination with the ocean that concerned her parents. From the village records archived in the Skagen Museum, we know that 1837 brought an unusually harsh winter to northern Jutland. The sea remained frozen for weeks longer than normal, trapping fishing vessels in the harbour and forcing families to survive on stored provisions. It was during this extended isolation that Kirsten Andersen began displaying behaviours that would later be documented in her father's fishing log. According to Jacob's entries, discovered in 1962 during renovations of the old harbour master's office, Kirsten would spend hours each day walking along the frozen shoreline. She spoke frequently of voices calling to her from beneath the ice, voices she claimed sang in languages she had never heard but somehow understood. Her parents initially dismissed these claims as the restless imaginings of a young woman confined by winter's grip. The first documented incident occurred on February 14, 1837. Maren Andersen reported to the village pastor that her daughter had been found at dawn, standing waist-deep in an opening in the ice, apparently unaware of the freezing water. When pulled from the sea, Kirsten showed no signs of cold or distress. She claimed to have been speaking with someone beneath the surface, though no one else was present. Village physician, Dr. A. Henrik Larsen examined Kirsten following this incident. His medical notes, preserved in the Danish National Archives, describe a young woman in perfect physical health despite her prolonged exposure to near-freezing water. More troubling were his observations of her mental state. Kirsten spoke coherently about her experiences, but insisted that the voices from the sea were becoming clearer, more insistent in their invitations for her to join them permanently. As winter slowly released its grip on Skagen, the fishing fleet prepared to return to deeper waters. Jacob Andersen noted in his log that Kirsten had begun spending entire nights on the shore, returning home only when the tide went out. Neighbours reported seeing her walking into the surf, fully clothed, only to emerge hours later dry and unharmed. The village pastor, Søren Nielsen, attempted to counsel the family during this period. His correspondence with the bishop in Aalborg, uncovered in church archives in 1964, reveals growing concern about what he termed unnatural influences affecting the Andersen household. Pastor Nielsen wrote of Kirsten's ability to predict weather changes with impossible accuracy, and her knowledge of maritime events occurring far beyond the village's sight. On March 21st, the spring equinox, Kirsten made her final appearance in the village. Multiple witnesses, including the harbour master and several fishermen preparing their nets, observed her walking purposefully toward the sea at sunset. She wore her finest dress, a blue wool garment her mother had sewn for special occasions. Those who saw her described an expression of profound peace on her face. Jacob Andersen discovered his daughter's dress folded neatly on the rocks the following morning. The fabric was completely dry, despite the previous night's rain. No other trace of Kirsten was ever found. The search conducted by village men lasted 3 days, covering every accessible cove and inlet along the coast. The sea had claimed the girl without leaving a single clue to her fate. In the weeks following Kirsten's disappearance, several fishermen reported unusual catches in their nets. Hans Mortensen, a neighbour of the Andersen family, documented in his fishing log that he had pulled up objects that seemed impossible for the sea to have preserved. a leather-bound book with dry pages containing text in an unknown script, silver jewelry of foreign design showing no signs of corrosion, and, most disturbing, locks of human hair bound with kelp that appeared recently cut. Dr. Larsson's final medical report on the Anderson family, written 6 months after Kirsten's disappearance, noted that both parents had developed what he termed melancholia of the sea. Jakob continued fishing, but spoke increasingly of voices calling to him from deep water. Maren rarely left their cottage, spending hours staring at the horizon through their single window. Neither parent spoke their daughter's name aloud again. The village adapted to Kirsten's absence with the practical stoicism common to coastal communities. Official records list her as lost to the sea, a fate that befell many young people in fishing villages. However, the whispered accounts that circulated among the women of Skagen told a different story. They spoke of a girl who had been chosen, called by something ancient that dwelt in the deepest parts of the North Sea. These whispers reached the ears of a young writer who visited Skagen in the summer of 1837. Hans Christian Andersen, no relation to the fishing family, had come to the village seeking inspiration for his fairy tales. Local residents, unaware of his literary intentions, shared their stories of the girl who had walked into the sea. They told him of her conversations with unseen beings, her immunity to cold water, and her final transformation. The writer filled his notebooks with these accounts, though he significantly altered the details in his published work. The dark reality of Kirsten's fate was transformed into a tale of sacrifice and redemption, suitable for children's literature. The true story of a young woman's disturbing connection to forces beneath the sea became a romantic fantasy of love, transcending the boundaries between species. Dr. Larsson's private journal, discovered in his family's estate in 1966, contained observations he had never included in his official reports. He wrote of examining other young women in coastal villages who displayed similar symptoms to Kirsten Andersen. His research suggested a pattern of disappearances along Denmark's coast, always involving unmarried women between the ages of 16 and 20, all of whom had reported hearing voices from the sea before vanishing. The physician's journal described his theory that certain individuals possessed an unusual sensitivity to what he termed aquatic influences. These people, predominantly young women, seemed to develop a form of communication with entities dwelling in deep ocean trenches. Dr. Larsson speculated that this phenomenon might explain numerous disappearances recorded in maritime communities throughout Scandinavia. His research ended abruptly in 1840 when he was found dead in his study, apparently having taken his own life. A letter discovered beside his body requested that his journals be destroyed, claiming his investigations had led him to conclusions too dangerous to record. His family honored this request, burning most of his papers. Only fragments survived, hidden in a false bottom of his medical bag and found decades later. The Andersen cottage remained occupied until 1855, when Jakob died during a winter storm. Maren survived her husband by only 3 months, found dead in her bed on a calm spring morning. Neighbors who prepared her body for burial noted that she appeared to have drowned, though she had been discovered in her dry bed, miles from the sea. The cottage was abandoned after her death, considered unlucky by the villagers. For 20 years, the Andersen property stood empty. Weather and neglect gradually reduced the structure to a collection of crumbling stone walls. Children from the village were warned to avoid the ruins, though few needed such warnings. The area surrounding the former cottage was said to be perpetually damp, regardless of weather conditions, and visitors reported hearing sounds of dripping water even during dry spells. In 1875, a visiting archaeologist from Copenhagen expressed interest in excavating the abandoned cottage site. Professor Carl Madsen believed the location might contain artifacts from earlier Danish settlements. Local authorities granted permission for his dig, though village elders advised against the project. Their concerns proved prophetic. Professor Madsen's excavation uncovered a stone chamber beneath the cottage foundation. His field notes, archived at the University of Copenhagen, describe a room that appeared to have been deliberately concealed. The chamber contained what he identified as ritual objects, carved stones depicting figures with both human and aquatic features. Bronze vessels filled with what appeared to be seawater, despite being buried for decades, and most significantly, human remains. The skeletal remains discovered in the chamber belonged to multiple individuals, all apparently young women, based on bone structure analysis. The bodies had been arranged in a circular pattern around a central pool that connected to underground water sources. Professor Madsen noted that the pool maintained a constant water level despite having no visible source, and the water remained clear and fresh-tasting despite its underground location. More disturbing were the professor's observations about the chamber's construction. The stonework showed evidence of being built in multiple phases, suggesting the space had been used for its apparent purpose over many generations. Carved symbols on the walls included what appeared to be calendar markings corresponding to lunar cycles and tidal patterns. The chamber seemed designed for regular use by people who understood both astronomy and oceanography. Professor Madsen's assistant, a young man named Eric Thompson, disappeared on the third day of excavation. He was last seen entering the chamber alone to sketch the wall carvings. A search of the underground space found no trace of Thompson, though his sketching materials were discovered arranged neatly beside the central pool. The water level in the pool appeared to have risen several inches since the previous day's measurements. Following his assistant's disappearance, Professor Madsen abandoned the excavation and requested that local authorities seal the chamber. His final report recommended that the site be declared dangerous and permanently closed to further investigation. The professor left Skagen immediately after filing this report and never returned to archaeological work. He spent his remaining years teaching Latin at a gymnasium in Odense, refusing to discuss his experiences in northern Jutland. The chamber was sealed with concrete and steel in 1876. Official records from the Skagen Municipal Office describe the sealing as a safety measure due to unstable underground conditions. However, letters between city officials reveal concerns about what they termed continuing disturbances at the site. Residents living near the former cottage reported sounds of flowing water coming from beneath the sealed ground, particularly during high tides. These reports continued sporadically until 1893, when the last family living adjacent to the sealed site moved away from Skagen. They cited health problems affecting their young daughter, who had begun sleepwalking toward the sealed chamber on nights when the moon was full. The girl, whose name was recorded only as Astrid, reportedly spoke in her sleep about voices calling to her from beneath the ground. The sealed site gradually became overgrown with vegetation and forgotten by most village residents. However, maritime records from the Skagen Harbour Master's office document an unusual pattern of fishing in the waters directly offshore from the former cottage location. Fishermen consistently reported that their nets came up empty when cast in those specific waters, despite sonar readings indicating abundant fish populations. More troubling were the occasional discoveries made by fishing crews working the area. Nets sometimes contained objects that should not have been present in Danish waters: shells from tropical seas, pieces of shipwrecks from vessels not known to have sunk in the North Sea, and most disturbing, jewelry and clothing items that appeared to be of recent manufacture despite being found at depths, suggesting they had been submerged for many years. Dr. Larsen's assistant, a young physician named Niels Brodersen, continued his mentor's research in secret after the doctor's death. Broderson's private correspondence, discovered in 1968 among his grandson's effects, revealed that he had documented similar disappearances in fishing communities throughout Scandinavia and northern Germany. His letters describe a network of underground chambers and pools, all connected to deep ocean trenches, used for purposes he could never definitively identify. Broderson's research suggested that the phenomena associated with these sites had been known to coastal communities for centuries. He collected oral histories from elderly residents of fishing villages, many of whom spoke of family members who had been called by the sea in previous generations. These stories shared common elements: young women who developed unusual connections to marine environments, periods of communication with unseen entities, and eventual disappearances during high tides or storms. The physician's investigations ended abruptly in 1867 when he was found dead at the bottom of cliffs near Aalborg. Official records list his death as accidental, but his letters suggest he had been planning to explore an underwater cave system he believed connected several coastal communities. His body was discovered wearing diving equipment of his own design, though no witness had seen him enter the water. Broderson's research materials were inherited by his younger brother, a pastor who was disturbed by their contents. The pastor attempted to donate the documents to the University of Copenhagen, but the university declined to accept materials they deemed unscholarly and potentially blasphemous. The documents were eventually stored in a church archive in Roskilde, where they remained unexamined until researchers studying Danish folklore discovered them in the 1960s. Meanwhile, Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale version of the events gained international popularity throughout the second half of the 19th century. The writer's transformation of Kirsten's dark fate into a story of love and sacrifice resonated with readers worldwide. Few people who enjoyed the tale were aware of its origins in actual disappearances that had plagued Danish coastal communities for generations. The author himself seemed troubled by the success of his sanitized version of the story. His personal diaries, published posthumously, contain several references to guilt about stealing sorrow and selling it as hope. Andersen wrote that he sometimes dreamed of a young woman walking into dark water, always turning to look at him with accusation in her eyes before disappearing beneath the surface. In 1915, construction workers preparing to build a new harbour facility in Skagen accidentally breached part of the sealed chamber system. Water began flowing from the construction site at a rate that suggested connection to a much larger underground network. The flow continued for 3 days, despite efforts to seal the breach, stopping only when workers dumped several tons of cement into the opening. The incident was reported in local newspapers as a minor construction delay, but correspondence between city officials reveals significant concern about what had been uncovered. Workers described hearing sounds like human voices coming from the water flow, though the sounds stopped whenever anyone approached close enough to investigate clearly. The cement seal held, but city engineers noted that ground-penetrating radar showed the underground chamber system extended much farther than previous investigations had indicated. During World War II, German occupation forces briefly showed interest in the sealed Skagen site. Military documents captured by Allied forces after the war included references to research into aquatic anomalies along the Danish coast. A small team of German scientists conducted limited excavations around the sealed chamber in 1943, though their findings were never officially recorded. Local resistance members who observed the German activities reported that the team's work ended suddenly after less than a week. The scientists departed Skagen urgently, leaving behind equipment and abandoning their excavation sites without attempting to seal or secure them. Resistance reports suggest that at least one German team member may have disappeared during the investigation, though official German records make no mention of personnel losses. After the war, British military engineers surveyed the abandoned German excavation sites. Their report, classified until 1975, described evidence of unusual hydrological activity around the sealed chamber. The engineers recommended that the entire area be declared off-limits and placed under military supervision, though this recommendation was never implemented due to competing post-war priorities. The British survey did note that the German excavation had partially reopened access to the underground chamber system. Sonar equipment detected water-filled passages extending northward toward the sea and southward toward inland Denmark. The passages appeared to be both natural and artificially modified, suggesting human engineering work over many generations. Military engineers sealed the German excavation sites with concrete, but their equipment indicated that the underground system remained active. In 1957, a team of marine biologists from the University of Copenhagen conducted research on unusual fish populations in waters off Skagen. Their study was prompted by fishing industry reports of catches containing species not normally found in North Sea waters. The research team documented several fish species that appeared to be genetic variants of common North Sea fish, showing modifications that suggested adaptation to deep ocean environments. More puzzling were the team's findings regarding the behavior of local fish populations. Sonar tracking revealed that schools of fish avoided specific areas of water that corresponded to the location of the sealed underground chamber. Fish populations would approach these areas during low tide, but retreat rapidly when tidal flows reversed. The biologists could find no environmental factors that would explain this behavior pattern. The research team's final report recommended further investigation into what they termed unknown biological factors affecting marine life in the area. However, funding for additional research was denied, and the team's findings were archived without follow-up study. Dr. Magnus Eriksson, the team's lead researcher, noted in his private correspondence that university administrators seemed reluctant to pursue investigations that might attract unwanted attention to the region. Dr. Eriksson continued his research independently until 1963, when his small boat was found empty and adrift 3 miles offshore from Skagen. Coast Guard searches found no trace of the biologist, though his research notes were discovered neatly arranged in his university office. The notes indicated he had been planning a dive expedition to explore underwater caves in the area where Kirsten Andersen had disappeared over a century earlier. The notes also revealed Dr. Eriksson's growing conviction that the unusual fish populations he had studied were connected to the sealed chamber system. He theorized that underground passages allowed deep ocean species to migrate into coastal waters, possibly explaining both the biological anomalies and the historical reports of unusual phenomena in the area. His final note, dated the day before his disappearance, expressed determination to prove his theory despite official discouragement. Following Dr. Eriksson's disappearance, the University of Copenhagen quietly discontinued marine research in the Skagen area. Official explanations cited budget constraints, but internal university correspondence reveals concerns about what administrators termed the pattern of researcher losses associated with investigations into local maritime phenomena. A moratorium on research proposals related to the sealed chamber site was implemented and remained in effect through the 1960s. During this same period, tourism to Skagen increased as Denmark promoted its coastal attractions. Tourist guidebooks mentioned the Hans Christian Andersen connection to the area, but omitted any reference to the actual events that had inspired the fairy tale. Visitors seeking sites related to the Little Mermaid were directed to Copenhagen's harbour statue rather than to Skagen, where the true story had unfolded. Local tourism officials actively discouraged interest in the historical aspects of the Andersen family story. Brochures and guides describe Skagen's natural beauty and artistic heritage, while avoiding mention of the disappearances, sealed chamber, or ongoing research moratorium. This deliberate omission was successful in preventing tourist attention from focusing on the more disturbing aspects of local history. However, some visitors discovered the true story through conversations with elderly residents. A few amateur historians and folklore enthusiasts attempted to investigate the sealed site, though local authorities consistently denied permission for any excavation or research activities. These restrictions were presented as environmental protections, but correspondence between municipal officials reveals the underlying concerns about disturbing whatever lay beneath the concrete seals. In 1968, construction of a new coastal road required surveying of the area around the sealed chamber. Survey teams using ground-penetrating equipment discovered that the underground system was larger and more complex than any previous investigation had revealed. The passages appeared to extend along the entire Danish coast, connecting multiple sites where unexplained disappearances had been reported throughout history. The survey findings prompted a secret meeting between Danish government officials, university administrators, and military representatives. Minutes from this meeting, declassified in 1995, reveal government concerns about potential public reaction to evidence of an extensive underground network that might be connected to centuries of unexplained disappearances. The decision was made to classify all survey data and cease any further investigation. The road construction was rerouted to avoid the sealed chamber area, officially due to soil instability concerns. Construction workers were required to sign agreements preventing them from discussing their work or any discoveries made during the project. Despite these precautions, local rumors persisted about workers hearing sounds from beneath the ground and finding objects that appeared far older than expected for the depth at which they were discovered. As 1969 approached, Denmark prepared to celebrate the 150-year anniversary of Hans Christian Andersen's birth. Cultural events were planned throughout the country, including special recognition of The Little Mermaid as Denmark's most beloved contribution to world literature. Plans for anniversary celebrations in Skagen were notably modest, focusing on the natural beauty that had inspired many of Andersen's works rather than on specific stories. Behind the scenes, government officials had concluded that the true story behind The Little Mermaid posed too many unanswered questions to receive public attention. Files related to the Kirsten Andersen case, the sealed chamber, and the research moratorium were transferred to a special archive with restricted access. Official policy established that the fairy tale version of events would be promoted, while historical investigations would be indefinitely postponed. Dr. Margrethe Holm, a folklore specialist at the University of Copenhagen, had spent years collecting oral histories related to unexplained disappearances in Danish coastal communities. Her research revealed a pattern spanning centuries: young women who developed unusual connections to marine environments before vanishing into the sea. Dr. Holm's work suggested that the phenomena associated with Kirsten Andersen were part of a much older tradition. Dr. Holm's collection included accounts from the Faroe Islands, Norway, and northern Germany that contained striking similarities to the Skagen events. In each case, the disappeared individuals had reported communication with entities dwelling beneath the sea. Families of the missing persons often spoke of finding their belongings arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement rather than accidental loss. The disappearances consistently occurred during specific tidal conditions and lunar phases. More disturbing were Dr. Holm's findings about the communities where such disappearances occurred. In many cases, local populations showed unusual knowledge of oceanography and marine biology that exceeded what formal education could explain. Fishing families in these communities demonstrated abilities to predict weather and tidal conditions with accuracy that surpassed scientific instruments. Some individuals could identify fish species and migration patterns from sounds alone, without visual confirmation. Dr. Holm theorized that the disappearances were connected to an ancient form of communication between humans and marine intelligence. Her research suggested that certain coastal communities had maintained contact with entities dwelling in deep ocean environments, possibly for thousands of years. The young women who vanished might have been selected as intermediaries in this communication. Though the purpose and nature of such contact remained unclear, her work was interrupted in late 1969 when university administrators informed her that funding for her research project would not be renewed. Dr. Holm was offered alternative projects focusing on documented historical events rather than unexplained phenomena. When she declined these alternatives, her position at the university was eliminated under budget reduction measures. Her research materials were confiscated and added to the restricted archive. Dr. Holm attempted to continue her work independently, but found that former research subjects were no longer willing to speak with her. Elderly residents of coastal communities who had previously shared family histories began claiming they had never spoken to her or knew nothing about the topics she mentioned. Library access to certain historical documents was denied, and archives that had been previously open suddenly required special permissions she was unable to obtain. In early 1970, Dr. Holm disappeared while conducting research in the Faroe Islands. Her rental car was found abandoned near a coastal cliff, though her body was never recovered. Local authorities concluded that she had fallen from the cliffs, possibly while investigating folklore sites related to her research. Her personal belongings were found neatly arranged in her hotel room, including research notes that appeared to have been edited to remove specific references to locations and individuals. The loss of Dr. Holm's work effectively ended academic investigation into the phenomena she had studied. No other researchers attempted to continue her documentation of coastal disappearances or the cultural patterns associated with them. The academic community seemed to accept that such investigations were too speculative and potentially dangerous to warrant continued study. By 1970, the true story of what had inspired Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid had been successfully obscured behind layers of official discouragement, restricted archives, and academic disinterest. The tale that had begun with Kirsten Andersen's walk into the North Sea in 1837 had become a footnote in classified files that few people would ever be authorized to read. The sealed chamber beneath the former Andersen cottage remains undisturbed to this day. Municipal records show that the concrete seals are inspected annually, though these inspections are conducted by specialized teams rather than regular maintenance workers. The inspection reports are classified and stored in the restricted archive, along with all other materials related to the site. Ground-penetrating sonar continues to detect water flow in the underground passages, but no attempt has been made to investigate the source or destination of this movement. Local fishing continues in the waters off Skagen, though certain areas remain avoided by experienced fishermen. Younger fishermen who ignore traditional warnings sometimes report unusual catches or equipment malfunctions when working these waters. Most learn to respect the boundaries that have been observed by local fishing families for generations. The reasons for these restrictions are no longer explained, having become simply accepted practice. Tourism to Skagen continues to emphasize the area's natural beauty and artistic heritage. Visitors seeking connections to Hans Christian Andersen's work are directed to museums and cultural sites that celebrate the fairy tale version of The Little Mermaid without reference to its darker origins. The sealed site remains unmarked and is not included in any tourist guides or local maps. Most visitors to the area never become aware of its existence. The bronze statue of the Little Mermaid in Copenhagen harbour continues to attract millions of visitors each year. The statue commemorates Andersen's fairy tale without any reference to the true events that inspired it. Most visitors to the statue are unaware that the story they celebrate originated in actual disappearances that plagued Danish coastal communities for centuries. The transformation of tragedy into beloved children's literature remains one of literature's most successful examples of sanitizing dark source material. Occasionally, researchers attempting to investigate Danish folklore encounter references to the restricted archive containing materials related to coastal disappearances. Access requests to these files are invariably denied, usually with explanations citing privacy concerns for families of missing persons. The true extent of the archived materials remains unknown to anyone outside the small group of officials responsible for maintaining the restrictions. In the deeper waters off Denmark's coast, fishing vessels sometimes encounter sonar readings that suggest large structures or formations on the ocean floor. These readings are typically attributed to shipwrecks or natural rock formations, though their regular geometric patterns seem inconsistent with such explanations. Maritime charts mark these areas with notations warning of irregular bottom conditions, and commercial fishing vessels are advised to avoid them. The sounds that Jacob Andersen described in his fishing log continue to be reported by fishermen working the waters where Kirsten disappeared. Modern fishing crews describe these sounds as equipment malfunctions or whale songs, though acoustic analysis has never successfully identified their source. The sounds are most commonly reported during specific tidal conditions and seem to originate from depths that exceed the range of conventional marine life in the area. Advanced sonar equipment occasionally detects what appear to be artificial structures in the deepest parts of the ocean trenches off Denmark's coast. These structures show geometric patterns suggesting intelligent construction, though they are located at depths that would have been impossible for historical human engineering to reach. Marine archaeologists who have requested permission to investigate these formations have been told that the areas are classified for national security reasons. The pattern of disappearances that Dr. Holm documented appears to have continued into the modern era, though such cases are now attributed to accidents, mental illness, or deliberate disappearances rather than unexplained phenomena. Missing persons reports from coastal communities still occasionally describe individuals who had expressed unusual interests in marine environments before their disappearances, but these details are typically dismissed as irrelevant by investigating authorities. Mental health professionals working in Danish coastal communities sometimes encounter patients who claim to hear voices from the sea or feel compelled to enter ocean water. These cases are treated as manifestations of mental illness and responded to with medication and therapy. Patients who persist in describing their experiences are often referred to specialized facilities inland, away from coastal environments that might reinforce their delusions. The underground chamber system that extends beneath Denmark's coast remains active according to seismic monitoring equipment. Water continues to flow through the passages, and periodic acoustic anomalies suggest ongoing activity within the network. However, the nature and purpose of this activity cannot be investigated due to the access restrictions that have been maintained for over a century. Scientific understanding of deep ocean environments has advanced significantly since the 19th century, revealing forms of life and conditions that were previously unimaginable. The deepest parts of ocean trenches host creatures and ecosystems that operate according to biological principles unknown to surface life. Some researchers theorize that intelligence capable of communication with humans might exist in these environments, though such theories are not supported by mainstream science. The technology now exists to thoroughly explore the sealed chamber system and the ocean formations that appear connected to it. Deep-sea exploration equipment could map the full extent of the underground network and identify whatever maintains the water flow and acoustic activity. However, the official restrictions on such investigation remain in place, supported by national security classifications that prevent public discussion of the rationale behind them. Modern Denmark celebrates Hans Christian Andersen as one of its greatest cultural exports. The fairy tale version of The Little Mermaid has inspired countless adaptations, interpretations, and commercial products. The story's themes of transformation, sacrifice, and love continue to resonate with audiences worldwide. Few people who enjoy these adaptations are aware that they celebrate a sanitized version of events that may have involved forms of intelligence and communication beyond current human understanding. The files in the restricted archive continue to accumulate reports and observations related to the phenomena first documented in Kirsten Andersen's case. These materials are reviewed periodically by a small committee of government officials and academics, but their contents are never released for broader study. The committee's discussions and decisions are themselves classified, maintaining secrecy about both the evidence and the decision-making process that keeps it hidden. As each generation passes, fewer people retain knowledge of the true events that inspired Denmark's most famous fairy tale. The elderly residents who might remember family stories about coastal disappearances have largely died without passing on their knowledge. Younger generations accept the fairy tale version of the story and show little interest in questioning its origins. The transformation from historical truth to beloved fiction appears to be complete, yet the sea itself remembers. The waters off Skagen continue to display the same anomalous behaviors that fishermen first noticed in the 1830s. The underground chambers remain active, the acoustic anomalies persist, and the sonar readings continue to suggest structures and activities that official science cannot explain. Whatever called to Kirsten Andersen in 1837 appears to remain present in the depths, waiting with the patience that only the sea possesses. The concrete seals that cover the chamber entrances show no signs of deterioration despite decades of exposure to coastal weather. Municipal engineers note that the seals appear to be self-maintaining, though no explanation exists for this phenomenon. Annual inspections reveal that the barriers remain intact, but they also confirm that activity continues beneath them. The water flows, the sounds persist, and the mysteries remain as deep as the ocean itself. The true story of The Little Mermaid rests in archives that few people will ever see, protected by classifications that may never be lifted. The young woman whose fate inspired one of the world's most beloved fairy tales remains as mysterious today as she was when she walked into the North Sea over a century and a half ago. Her story serves as a reminder that some questions may be too dangerous to answer, and some doors should remain forever closed. In the depths beneath Denmark's coastal waters, in chambers carved from stone and time, in the spaces between what science can explain and what human experience suggests, the truth waits. It waits with the endless patience of the sea, in voices that called to a fisherman's daughter long ago and may still be calling today. The Little Mermaid's true story is not one of love conquered or sacrifice rewarded, but of mysteries that human understanding is not yet ready to embrace. The waters off Skagen hold their secrets with the tenacity of centuries. Modern fishing vessels, equipped with advanced sonar, occasionally detect movements in the deepest trenches that suggest intelligence, purpose, and perhaps recognition of the surface world above. These readings are filed in maritime reports that few people read and fewer still understand. The bronze statue in Copenhagen harbour remains a monument to transformation, not just of a tragic tale into beloved fiction, but of human memory itself. Millions of visitors photograph themselves beside the statue, unaware they celebrate a story rooted in disappearances that official Denmark has chosen to forget. The mermaid's bronze gaze looks eternally seaward, toward waters that continue to call. In 2003, during routine harbour maintenance in Skagen, construction workers discovered fragments of blue wool fabric buried in sediment that should have been deposited decades earlier. The fabric matched descriptions of the dress Kirsten Andersen wore on her final walk to the sea in 1837. Carbon dating was requested, but never performed. The samples disappeared from the laboratory before analysis could begin. The restricted archive grows thicker each year with reports that follow familiar patterns. Young women in coastal communities develop unusual affinities for marine environments. They speak of voices beneath the waves, of communications beyond human language. Most are treated for mental health conditions and recover after being moved inland. Some do not recover. A few in each generation simply disappear. Dr. Larsen's theory about aquatic influences affecting certain individuals has never been officially investigated, though maritime medical records suggest the phenomenon he documented continues. Physicians in coastal areas occasionally encounter cases that match his descriptions exactly, but these cases are typically transferred to psychiatric facilities where the patients receive treatment designed to eliminate their reported experiences rather than understand them. The sealed chambers beneath Denmark's coast remain active, their purposes unknown, and their investigation forbidden. Government officials who review the restricted files occasionally recommend that the moratorium on research be lifted, but these recommendations are consistently overruled by committees whose deliberations are themselves classified. The decision to maintain ignorance appears to be institutional policy rather than individual choice. Hans Christian Andersen's transformation of Kirsten's fate into the Little Mermaid represents more than literary adaptation. It demonstrates humanity's capacity to reshape unbearable truth into comforting fiction. The girl who walked into dark water to answer an inhuman call became a symbol of love's triumph over adversity. Reality was alchemized into hope, and the world embraced the beautiful lie while forgetting the disturbing truth. Yet truth has its own persistence. In the deepest parts of the North Sea, where light never reaches and pressure would crush human life, something continues to wait. The voices that called to Kirsten Andersen echo still, seeking others who might possess her particular sensitivity to communications from the abyss. The sea remembers what the land chooses to forget. The fishermen of Skagen continue their ancient work, guided by warnings passed down through generations they no longer fully understand. They avoid certain waters on certain tides, respect boundaries marked only by tradition, and sometimes hear sounds that remind them the ocean holds more than fish. They do not speak of these things to outsiders, having learned that some knowledge is too dangerous to share. The concrete seals over the underground chambers will eventually fail, as all human constructions must. When that day comes, Denmark will face a choice between continued ignorance and dangerous truth. The committees that maintain the current restrictions understand this inevitability, but they continue to choose delay over discovery, believing that future generations will be better equipped to handle revelations that current society cannot accept. The true story of the Little Mermaid remains what it has always been. A tale of contact between human consciousness and something vast, patient, and utterly alien that dwells in the deep places of the world. Kirsten Andersen was neither victim nor sacrifice, but rather a bridge between species, a translator for communications that transcend human understanding. Her fate was not tragic, but transformative, though the nature of that transformation remains hidden beneath layers of official denial and deliberate forgetting. In the end, perhaps Hans Christian Andersen understood more than his fairy tale revealed. Perhaps he knew that some truths are too large for direct telling, requiring the gentle deception of fiction to make them bearable. The little mermaid who gained her soul through suffering may be closer to reality than anyone suspects. For in the depths where Kirsten vanished, transformation continues, communication persists, and the ancient dialogue between land and sea proceeds in languages humanity is not yet ready to learn. The waves continue to whisper against the shores of Skagen, carrying voices from depths unmeasured. Some who listen carefully claim to hear their own names being called, spoken in tones that promise understanding beyond human limits. Most resist the call, choosing the safety of ignorance over the danger of knowledge. But occasionally, very rarely, someone walks into the water and does not return. The sea waits. It has always waited, and somewhere in the darkness below, where pressure transforms everything and voices speak in currents older than human memory, the conversation that began with a fisherman's daughter in 1837 continues still, patient as the tides, eternal as the deep.